please. Before we move to the orders of the day, I wish to advise the House that the clerk has conducted a draw for the late debate, and the honourable member from Halifax Atlantic will debate at 6 p.m. this evening or whenever the time permits. Therefore, it be resolved that this government move to appoint community prosecutors to better serve Nova Scotians. We will now begin with the daily routine. The Honourable the Minister of Justice.
With your permission, I'd like to make an introduction, if I could.
Sure.
I'd like to bring the attention of the members in the East Gallery. I'd like to introduce Ms. Dulcie McCollum, who's Nova Scotia's Freedom of Information Protection and Privacy Review Officer. As all members will know, Ms. McCollum has just accepted the position over the last number of months. Ms. McCollum received her law degree from the University of Victoria and has expertise in administrative and human rights law. And over the past 30 years, Ms. McCollum has held positions in private practice and in the public sector. She was the Ombudsman for the province of British Columbia for 7 years until 1999. And since then, Ms. McCollum has worked for government in a number of organizations, including representative on the Canadian delegation to the United Nations to draft the new UN Convention of Rights of Persons with Disabilities. So I'd ask Ms. McCollum to rise and receive the warm welcome of the House, please.
Thank you. Presenting and reading petitions. The honourable member for Queens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to table the following petition, of which I have affixed my signature, the operative clause reading, "To whom it may concern, we the residents of Bangs Falls residing on the Medway River request that some consideration be given to replacing or repairing the pavement from Route 210 through Bangs Falls and back up to Route 210.
Petition is tabled. Are there further petitions? Presenting reports of committees. Tabling reports, regulations, and other papers. The Honourable the Minister of Environment and Labour.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I take great pleasure in tabling a report from the Superintendent of Pensions on the administration of the Pensions Benefits Act for the year ending March 31st, 2006, and also the Workers' Compensation Board of Nova Scotia, the 2006 annual report, and just noting that the percentage funded ratio has gone up once again, and the injury frequency rate has gone down. So good news there.
The reports are tabled. Are there further tabling reports, regulations, and other papers? Statement by ministers. Government notices of motion. The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, before I read my resolution, if I might make an introduction.
Please do so.
I'd like to draw the House's attention to the Speaker's gallery, Mr. Speaker. We have a very special guest with us here today, Mr. Tim Margolian, as the Treasurer of the Atlantic Jewish Council, and graciously agreed to serve as the Council's representative here in the House today. And I would ask Mr. Margolian to rise and receive the warm welcome from all members. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Memorial Day, will this year be honored on April 16th, setting aside a brief moment to honor and reflect on the memories of those who suffered unspeakable cruelties and death. And whereas Yom HaShoah, the Holocaust, refers to the state-sponsored systematic persecution and annihilation of European Jewry by the Nazis between the years of 1938 and 1945, whereas a singular tragedy which saw the lives of 6 million innocent Jewish men, women, and children extinguished at the hands of the Nazis, while almost incomprehensible for most, should for that very reason never be forgotten. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House recognize the significance of this day, which stands both as a symbol of one of history's most treacherous incidents of man's inhumanity to man, and hence a time to honor the millions of victims of the Holocaust and survivors still living with its nightmares. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Thank you. There's been a request for waiver of notice. Is it agreed? Agreed. Would all those in favour of the motion please say aye. Aye. Contrary minded nay. Motion carried. The Honourable the Minister of Tourism, Culture and Heritage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas cruise ships contribute much more to our economy when they pick up and drop off their passengers at a Nova Scotia port, because these passengers tend to stay in the home port before and after the cruise, and whereas encouraging more home porting in Nova Scotia is part of the Gateway strategy and our new tourism plan developed through the Industry Government Tourism Partnership Council, and whereas after discussions with Tourism, Culture and Heritage, Destination Halifax and the Halifax Port Authority, Pearl Sea Cruises recently announced that starting in July 2008, they will make Halifax the home port for their new luxury cruise ship for 165 passengers and add another 210 passengers in 2009. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House welcome Pearl Sea Cruises and acknowledge this positive step for Nova Scotia's tourism industry. Mr. Speaker, I would request a waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver of notice. Is it agreed? All those in favour of the motion, please say aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion carried. The Honourable the Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on the future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Credit Union Small Business Finance and Loan Guarantee Program has leveraged a total of $18.1 million in loans to 245 small businesses throughout the province, and whereas the loan program has created or maintained more than 1,500 jobs, mainly in rural Nova Scotia, and whereas that given the current trends, the program is expected to reach 1,000 businesses over the next decade, or could double or triple the current job creation figures. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the House applaud the success of the program and the partnership of the credit unions, the Nova Scotia Co-op Council, and the Nova Scotia Economic Development. And I request waiver, Mr. Speaker.
There's been a request for waiver of notice. Is it agreed? Would all those in favour of the motion, please say aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion carried. The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'll be doing this on behalf of the Honourable Minister of Community Services. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the week of April 15 to 22nd is Foster Family Recruitment Week in Nova Scotia, and foster care resources teams are working across the province to raise awareness about the rewards of fostering a youth or child. And whereas in Nova Scotia, foster parents work as a part of a team of professionals who ensure children and youth receive the love and support that they need. And whereas Nova Scotia is committed to attracting and training caring families who can help children and youth, and that Nova Scotia has made great strides in recruiting and retaining foster parents in recent years with significant success. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House commend Nova Scotia's existing foster families and encourage more families to open their hearts and homes to children in need. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver of notice. Is it agreed? All those in favour of the motion, please say aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion carried. The Honourable the Minister of Fisheries and Aquaculture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas members of the Eastern Nova Scotia Holstein Club, which involves Holstein producers from Antigonish and Geyser counties and producers from Cape Breton, recently celebrated their 30th anniversary. And whereas the Eastern Nova Scotia Holstein Club is host to a sold-out pre-tour of the Canadian Holstein producers today and yesterday, prior to the National Holstein Convention in Charlottetown this coming weekend. And whereas the two-day pre-tour involved tours of Sugarloaf Holsteins, Glen Holsteins, and West River Holsteins in Harbour Centre yesterday, and stops at Lindenord Holsteins and Trivy Holsteins today, before having lunch at the Scottsburn Ice Cream Plant in Antigonish, and leaving for Charlottetown later this afternoon for Holstein Heaven 2007. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly congratulate the Eastern Nova Scotia Holstein Club for their many years of success and for showing the rest of Canada what great Holstein farms exist in Eastern Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver of notice. Is it agreed? All those in favour of the motion, please say aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion carried. Are there further government notices of motion? Introduction of bills. The Honourable the Minister of Service Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Mr. Speaker, with your permission, I'd like to make an introduction in advance of introducing the bill.
Please do so.
I direct the attention of the House to the East Gallery, where we are joined by three people who were instrumental in doing the work that is produced this document that I will soon be tabling. It's an amendment to the Companies Act, and I'd like to ask Maurice Chasson, who is a corporate lawyer from Stuart McKelvey, Faye Shar, a corporate lawyer from McGuinness Cooper, and Kerry McLean, who is the Registrar of Joint Stock Companies in my department, to stand and receive the warm welcome of the House, and thanks. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to entitle a bill to introduce or table or whatever a bill entitled an act to amend Chapter 81 of the Revised Statutes of 1989, the Companies Act. Thank you.
Thank you. The Honourable Minister begs leave to introduce the bill entitled an act to amend Chapter 81 of the Revised Statutes of 1989, the Companies Act.
Bill number 192, an act to amend Chapter 81 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Companies Act.
Order that this bill be read a second time on a future day. The honourable member for Cape Breton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to introduce a bill on behalf of the member from Halifax Atlantic, an act to amend Chapter 18 of the Acts of 1998, Municipal Government Act.
The honourable member begs leave to introduce a bill entitled an act to amend Chapter 18 of the Acts of 1988, the Municipal Governments Act.
Bill number 193, an act to amend Chapter 18 of the Acts of 1998, the Municipal Government Act.
Order that this bill be read a second time on a future day. The honourable member for Cape Breton South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the member from Clare, I beg leave to introduce a bill, an act to amend Chapter 293 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Motor Vehicle Act.
The honourable member begs leave to introduce a bill entitled an act to amend Chapter 293 of the Revised Statutes of 1989, the Motor Vehicle Act.
Bill number 194, an act to amend Chapter 293 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Motor Vehicle Act.
Order that this bill be read a second time on a future day. The Honourable the Minister of Justice.
Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled an act to amend Chapter 218 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Incompetent Persons Act, and certain other statutes.
The Honourable Minister begs leave to introduce a bill entitled an act to amend Chapter 218 of the Revised Statutes of 1989, the Incompetent Persons Act, and certain other statutes.
Bill number 195, an act to amend Chapter 218 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Incompetent Persons Act, and certain other statutes.
Order that this bill be read a second time on a future day. The Honourable the Leader of the Liberal Party.
Speaker, on behalf of my colleague, the member for Halifax Clayton Park, I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled an act to require the Minister of Immigration to implement an apprenticeship program for newcomers and internationally trained persons.
The honourable member begs leave to introduce a bill entitled an act to require the Minister of Immigration to implement an apprenticeship program for newcomers and internationally trained persons.
Bill number 196, an act to require the Minister of Immigration to implement an apprenticeship program for newcomers and internationally trained persons.
Order that this bill be read a second time on a future day. Are there further? The Honourable the Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled an act to amend Chapter 244 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Justice of the Peace Act.
The Honourable Minister begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 244 of the Revised Statutes of 1989, the Justice of the Peace Act.
Bill number 197, an act to amend Chapter 244 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Justices of the Peace Act.
Whereas this bill be read a second time on a future day. Are there further bills? Notice of motion. The Honourable, the Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas it is with great sorrow that once again we are hearing of the deaths of yet 2 more Canadians in the conflict in Afghanistan, following so closely on the heels of the deaths of 6 young soldiers in that conflict earlier this week. And whereas the news of yet more lives of young men and women being lost in this war is becoming an all too common occurrence. And whereas despite the frequency with which we are faced with the loss of young lives that were filled with such great potential, the news is never easier to face for their families, friends, community, and in fact, for the entire nation. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House rise for a moment of silence in memory of those who lost their lives yesterday and throughout this conflict, and in solidarity with those who love them and are now facing a time of deep sorrow. And Mr. Speaker, I would request waiver and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver of notice. Is it agreed? Agreed. Would all those in favour of the motion please say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion carried. Please stand for a moment of silence. Please be seated. The Honourable, the Leader of the Liberal Party.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the men and women of the Canadian Armed Forces risk their lives every day and believe in the duty they have undertaken in Afghanistan. And as whereas late yesterday afternoon we learned of 2 more casualties for the Canadian Armed Forces from the conflict in Afghanistan. Whereas Master Corporal Alan Stewart and Trooper Patrick James Pentland, both originally from New Brunswick, were with the Royal Canadian Dragoons based at CFB Petawawa in Ontario. Therefore be it resolved that members of the House of Assembly offer our condolences to the families of Master Corporal Alan Stewart and Trooper Patrick James Pentland and pledge our support to our men and women serving overseas. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver of notice. Is it agreed? Would all those in favour of the motion please say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion carried. The Honourable, the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas April 2007 marked the retirement of one of Pictou County's premier athletic coaches, whereas that gentleman also happens to be the member for Pictou Centre, having earned the respect, admiration, and trust of players, parents, officials, and fans over the past 31 years. Whereas throughout his 31-year career, the member for Pictou Centre has been recognized by the Nova Scotia School Athletic Federation for his outstanding service, was a founding member of the Pictou County Junior High School Softball League while earning 4 provincial championships, different regional titles at Trenton Junior High School, Trenton High School, North Nova Education Centre, as well as with Pictou County Minor Hockey, New Glasgow Minor Soccer, and the Stellarton Ringette Association. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly recognize the tremendous and important dedication to youth and amateur sports in Pictou County offered by the member for Pictou Centre over the past 31 years. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver of notice. Is it agreed? Would all those in favour of the motion please say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion carried. The Honourable, the Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Lachlan McLean Cameron of Woods Harbour was a loving father, grandfather, brother, and friend. And whereas Mr. Cameron's family and friends know that he will long be remembered for his quick wit, candidness, and amazing inner strength. And whereas Mr. Cameron will be particularly remembered by his daughter Luella who was by his side so much in recent months, and by her husband Sterling Beliveau and their daughters. Therefore, be it resolved that this House extend its deepest sympathy on the death of Lachlan McLean Cameron to Luella Beliveau and to our colleague, the MLA for Shelburne, to their daughters, and to all who knew and loved him. And, Mr. Speaker, I would request waiver and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver of notice. Is it agreed? Would all those in favour of the motion please say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion carried. The Honourable, the Leader of the Liberal Party.
Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas April 22nd to 28 marks the second National Victims of Crime Awareness Week in Canada. And whereas to help communities observe the week locally, a resource guide has been published with a range of practical tools, valuable tips, testimonials, success stories, and current information about victim issues. Whereas this year's theme is, quote, "It's time to listen," end quote, which focuses on the need for all Canadians to heed the calls of help from victims of crime across the country. Therefore, be it resolved that members of the House of Assembly recognize April 22nd and April 28th as National Victims of Crime Awareness Week and help those who have been victimized by crime in our country. Speaker, I ask waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver of notice. Is it agreed? Agreed. Would all those in favour of the motion please say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion carried. The Honourable the Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Marilyn Hamlin, an educational assistant in New Minas, will be retiring in June after 25 years plus service to the children of New Minas Elementary School. And whereas she and her husband Wayne have coordinated the breakfast program for over 10 years and volunteer to pick up and deliver all supplies needed for the program. And whereas Marilyn and Wayne's volunteer efforts have contributed to the enhancement of the learning environment for hundreds of students annually, therefore be it resolved that all members of this House recognize the outstanding contribution and volunteer efforts of the Hamlins, and indeed all school volunteers, in making our schools a better place for our children to learn. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver of notice. Is it agreed? Agreed. Would all those in favour of the motion please say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion carried. The Honourable Member for Hants East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas junior hockey is exciting and affordable entertainment for the whole family, and whereas the Nova Scotia Junior A Hockey League is comprised of teams representing a wide variety of towns and communities across Nova Scotia. Whereas the East Hants Pharmacy Penguins won their first league championship with a perfect 12-0 record in the playoffs. Therefore, be resolved that this House of Assembly congratulate the coaching staff and players of the East Hants Pharmacy Penguins on their championship win and outstanding season. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Thank you. There's been a request for waiver of notice. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour of the motion, please say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion carried. The Honourable Member for Glace Bay.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Savoy Theatre, situated in downtown Glace Bay, is celebrating its 80th anniversary this year and is managed by Mr. Donald Ferguson. Whereas the Savoy, as it's commonly known, was built by McSween Contractors for John Connors in the 1920s to the specifications of the famed Victorian show houses and used as a movie theatre. In the early 1970s, through the initiative of Mayor Dan Munro, the town of Glace Bay bought the theatre from famous players, and it was renovated and restored to its former glory. And whereas over the past 80 years, the Savoy has hosted a wide range of events and has become known as the cultural centre for Cape Breton. Therefore, be it resolved, the members of the House of Assembly wish the Savoy Theatre, its manager Donald Ferguson, and staff continued success and a prosperous future in the coming years. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Thank you. There's been a request for waiver of notice. Is it agreed? Would all those in favour of the motion please say aye. Aye. Motion contrary-minded, nay. Motion carried. The Honourable the Minister of Fisheries and Aquaculture.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And my resolution today is seconded by the member from Antigonish as well. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Teresa Lockie McDonald of Heatherton, Antigonish County has been a community volunteer for over 50 years, and whereas Teresa has been a treasurer for the Heatherton Activity Centre for over 32 years, a member of the Catholic Women's League for over 50 years, and has been supervising children at the Heatherton School for over 26 years, and is also a volunteer and fundraiser for the Nova Scotia Kidney Foundation, as well as many other charitable organizations. And whereas Teresa is a wonderful, loving mother of 5 children and a grandmother of 8 and a good friend to many, therefore be it resolved that members of this House recognize the amazing contribution of Teresa Lockie MacDonald to her community. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Thank you. There's been a request for waiver of notice. Is it agreed? Would all those in favour of the motion please say aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion carried. The honourable member for Cape Breton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Edward Cusack of Reserve Mines joined the Reserve Mines Volunteer Fire Department 65 years ago this April, and whereas Mr. Cusack has served his department in many capacities, such as Lieutenant of the Engines, Assistant Deputy Chief, and Chief, and whereas Eddie continues to serve his department by working with the Bingo Committee and various other functions, therefore be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulate Edward Cusack for his 65 years of service to the Reserve Mines Fire Department and for his leadership role in his community. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Thank you. There's been a request for waiver of notice. Is it agreed? Agreed. Would all those in favour of the motion please say aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion carried. The member for Kings West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Evan Nickerson has been awarded the Junior Shodan First Degree Black Belt in Aikido, and whereas Evan is the first student of Yoshinkan Aikido to have earned this level, and whereas for the past 7 years Evan has trained at the Aikido program offered at Ecole Rose Devant in Greenwood, therefore be it resolved that members of this House congratulate Evan Nickerson for earning his first degree black belt and wish him continued success in all his future endeavours. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been request for waiver of notice. Is it agreed? Agreed. Would all those in favour of the motion please say aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion carried. The Honourable the Minister of Education on an introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and if I could draw the attention of the members of the House to the gallery opposite, I would like to introduce to all members of the House the Special Education Review Team. I've spoken about that team and their mandate, and they are here today. I would like to introduce them. Chair of that team is Walter Farmer. I'd like Walter to stand, please, for an introduction. Walter is a retired assistant superintendent, brings a lot of expertise in education to the committee. He will be joined by Mike Miles McDonald. Miles McDonald is a retired teacher who has worked with special needs students throughout his career. And Professor Lynn Elward, not here. Professor Lynn Elward represents the university sector, and so we have boards, classrooms, and university sector here on that team. I'm looking forward to their report and hopefully recommendations that we can bring forward as in the form of amendments to the Act. So thank you very much for your work and welcome to the House. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Matthew Brown, a member of the Truro Quick Copy Band and AAA Bearcats hockey team, has been awarded the Asante Capital Management Limited Outstanding Male Athlete Award in the 15 and under age category. And whereas Matt, as captain of the team, scored 97 goals and set up 46 others to lead the Bearcats to a provincial championship. And whereas Matt also participated in the Canada Winter Games in Whitehorse, therefore be it resolved that all members of this House extend their congratulations to Matthew Brown for winning this Outstanding Male Athlete Award. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice, passage without debate.
Thank you. There's been a request for waiver of notice. Is it agreed? Agreed. Would all those in favour of the motion please say aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion carried. The Honourable the Member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas homegrown organic foods was started in 1999 by Gordy Octoloni, and whereas homegrown organic foods helps make locally produced organic foods more affordable and accessible by providing an online shopping system and a home delivery service. And whereas homegrown organic foods is helping to make a stronger connection between local producers and local consumers. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulate homegrown organic foods on doing their part to help make it easier for consumers to choose locally grown organic food and wish them continued success in the future. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Thank you. There's been request for waiver of notice. Is it agreed?
Thank you.
All those in favour of the motion, please say aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion carried. The honourable member for Digby Annapolis.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the most recent loss of Canadian soldiers in Afghanistan only proves to us the bravery and dedication of our men and women show every day in this region which needs our help. And whereas Lillian Daniels, a teacher at Barton Elementary School, has collected and sent more than 50 letters from students to soldiers from the Digby area serving in Afghanistan. And whereas local students like Logan Dossett and Brittany White are showing their support to our troops stationed overseas by writing these letters and showing us that compassion starts from the time we are very young. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of the House of Assembly congratulate Lillian Daniels and her students at Barton Elementary for their encouragement of our Canadian Armed Forces overseas and pledge our continued support to these heroic men and women. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice. Passage without debate.
Thank you. There's been a request for waiver of notice. Is it agreed? Would all those in favour of the motion please say aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion carried. The Honourable the Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Truro Sport Heritage Society officially opened the Colchester County Sport Hall of Fame on November 3rd, 2006, whereas the Colchester County Sport Hall of Fame now has a permanent home in the recently opened Marigold Centre and consists of the honor roll inductees of the Truro Sport Heritage Society. Whereas a part of the official opening, 7 members were added to the Hall of Fame: Mike Henderson, Jim Cumming, Randy Kroll, Dave Pierce, and deceased athletes Hanson T. Dial, Jack Learmont, and Vern Newt Hopper. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate the Truro Sport Heritage Society on the official opening of the Colchester County Sport Hall of Fame and thank it for its continuing contribution to the recognition of athletic excellence in Colchester County. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been request for waiver of notice. Is it agreed? All those in favour of the motion please say aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion carried. The honourable member for Pictou West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Grace Maxner of Scottsburn recently celebrated her 7th birthday, and whereas for her birthday party, Grace asked that her friends and family not give her presents, but instead a donation to a charity, and whereas the approximate $130 that Grace received was donated to the pediatric unit of the Aberdeen Hospital in New Glasgow. Therefore, be it resolved, this House of Assembly commend Grace Maxner of Scottsburn for her initiative and generous donation to the pediatric unit at the Aberdeen Hospital in New Glasgow, a fine example of paying it forward. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Thank you. There's been request for waiver of notice. Is it agreed? Agreed. Would all those in favour of the motion please say aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion carried. The Honourable the Minister of Natural Resources.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Murray Salzman has been a member of the King's Crime Prevention Association since 1999, and whereas Murray initiated and is currently coordinator of the Neighbourhood Watch Program in Grafton, and presently sits as Vice Chair of Valley Crime Stoppers, devoting countless hours of volunteer work, and whereas he also started a fundraising campaign, selling gladiolas in memory of his late wife, Marg, for the Patient Navigator Service at the Valley Regional Hospital, and formed a registered charity called the Marg Salzman Cancer Care Memorial Fund, which has raised thousands of dollars since 2004, assisting families of cancer patients with related expenses. Therefore, be it resolved that all the members of this House recognize the extraordinary volunteer health and safety contributions that Murray Salzman has made to his community and continues to make for the citizens of Nova Scotia. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Thank you. There's been a request for waiver of notice. Is it agreed? Would all those in favour of the motion please say aye. Aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion carried. The honourable member for Cape Breton Nova.
Thank Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on the future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on March the 6th, 2007, Atlantic University Sport announced its 2006-2007 Men's Basketball All-Stars. And whereas Cape Breton Capers Eric Breland was selected as a first Team All-Star, and whereas Eric led his team both in scoring, including 6 games scoring 20 or more points, as well as in rebounding. Therefore, be resolved that this House of Assembly congratulate Eric Breland on his outstanding athletic achievement of being named the 2006-2007 First Team All-Star, and wish Eric all the best in his future endeavors. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been request for waiver of notice. Is it agreed? Agreed. Would all those in favour of the motion please say aye. Aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion carried. The honourable member for Hants West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Windsor resident the Reverend Bill Gibson is one of 69 volunteers from across Nova Scotia who was recognized Tuesday at Nova Scotia's 33rd Annual Provincial Volunteer Award Ceremony. And whereas Bill's name was put forward by the town of Windsor for being actively involved in the Windsor Fire Department for the past 12 years, providing support and critical incident debriefing to fellow firefighters and being named Firefighter of the Year in 2005. And whereas Bill's volunteer work, excuse me, and whereas Bill's volunteer work goes beyond the Windsor Fire Department, as he has volunteered with the Windsor Food Bank, the Windsor Economic Development Advisory Committee, chairing the Friends of the Library Committee, and serving on 5 local school-based crisis intervention teams. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House extend our gratitude to Windsor's Reverend Bill Gibson for his cheery personality, his humor, and exceptionally quick wit, and for his well-deserved recognition in the 2007 33rd Annual Nova Scotia Volunteer Award Ceremony and Dinner. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Okay, there's been a request for waiver of notice. Is it agreed? Agreed. Would all those in favour of the motion please say aye. Aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion carried. The honourable member for Halifax Citadel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the launch of the Nova Scotia Cultural Action Network, or Nova Scotia CAN, took place on February 22, 2007 at the Art Gallery of Nova Scotia, and whereas Nova Scotia CAN is a coalition of individuals dedicated to the progressive development of the province's arts and culture for the benefit of all Nova Scotians, and whereas the organization is striving to make Nova Scotia a world leader in the arts and cultural sectors and is calling for support from all levels of government, businesses, and the public to help realize this vision, therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly commit to working with the Nova Scotia Cultural Action Network to develop policies that are reflective of the needs and collective wisdom of individual artists and arts and cultural organizations in this province. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Thank you. There's been a request for waiver of notice. Is it agreed? No, I hear several no's. The motion is tabled. The honourable member for Cape Breton Centre. Pardon me. Yeah. Pictou Centre.
Pictou Centre. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas a landmark is closing, the West Side Family Restaurant in New Glasgow, which grew from being a diner to a special meeting place. And whereas the eatery first opened in 1959 as the House of Hay Drive-In Restaurant, and it became a traditional place in the county with generation after generation going there. And whereas waitress Stella McKenzie has worked at the restaurant for 38 years. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate the owners, John and Wilma Gerling, and John's parents, Tony and Chris, for their dedicated service, loyalty, and friendship to all the customers that entered their restaurant during the past several decades. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver of notice. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion carried. The honourable member for Queens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Whereas on Tuesday, April 10, 2006, all members of the House of Assembly received a postcard from the Friends of Port Mattoon Bay in their mailbox in-house. And whereas Eugene Broom, a lifelong resident of Southwest Port Mattoon, and a fisherman for 67 years, fears the end of a way of life for his family and his community if Aquafish Farm Limited is allowed to put a 70-acre fish farm in Port Mattoon Bay. And whereas Eugene Broome is quoted as saying, "Something's wrong when you have to fight like this just to keep your friggin' harbor." Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly recognize and support Eugene Broome, the Friends of Port Mattoon Bay, local council, and the community at large in their efforts to stop the expansion of Aquafish Farms Limited in Port Mattoon Bay. Mr. Speaker, I request notice of motion and passage without debate.
I would like to look at that resolution before it's tabled, please. The honourable member for Hants West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Princess Hansport 2007 is Jessica Price, daughter of Daniel and Candy Price of Hansport. And whereas Jessica is presently enrolled and attending her second year at Bethany Bible College in Sussex, New Brunswick, as she pursues a degree in ministry after doing exceptional volunteer work in the United States at places such as Cerebral Palsy Hospital in New York City and the New Brunswick Youth Correctional Facility. And whereas Jessica is an inquisitive learner, enjoys cooking and working with children as she prepares to represent the town of Hansport in the 75th Annapolis Valley Apple Blossom Festival. And she could become the 9th Princess Hansport to ever be chosen, Queen Annapolisa, during coronation ceremonies, Friday evening, June 1st at University Hall in Wolfville. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House extend our sincere best wishes to Ms. Jessica Price as she carries out her official duties on behalf of the town of Hansport while wishing her continued success in her educational studies for the ministry. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver of notice. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour of the motion, please say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion carried. The honourable member for Halifax Atlantic.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas cashiers, bank tellers, and other members of the service economy in Nova Scotia spend long hours standing at one workstation, and whereas prolonged standing in one spot is associated with chronic back pain, joint compression, muscle strain, and other musculoskeletal disorders, often leading to disability. And whereas European practice has long allowed cashiers and bank tellers the option of sitting while at their workstation, and there's no obvious advantage in requiring these personnel to stand. Therefore, be it resolved that the House of Assembly take a lead in improving the lives of working people in this province by ensuring seating is available for those workers required to spend more than 2 hours at a time standing at a single workstation. Mr. Speaker, I request waivers of notice and passage without debate.
Thank you. There's been requests for waiver of notice. Is it agreed? I hear several noes. The motion is tabled. The Honourable the Minister of Environment and Labour.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas 15-year-old pianist Lucas Porter of Port William submitted his first orchestral composition to an international competition and won, and whereas Lucas defeated hundreds of applicants worldwide to claim the Realize Music Challenge, sponsored by the software company Notion Music Incorporated, where his piece is entitled Port William's Overture. Took him 3 weeks to write, and he then performed it with the Royal Conservatory of Music Orchestra. Therefore, be resolved that all members of this House recognize the musical talent of Lucas Porter and wish him continued success as he strives to achieve his goal to be a concert pianist. I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Thank you. There's been request for waiver of notice. Is it agreed? Agreed. Would all those in favour of the motion please say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion carried. The honourable member for Queens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas 2 North Queens students of the Cooperative Education Program through their school, North Queens Rural High School, chose to do 100 hours of volunteer work in the North Queens Nursing Home, and whereas these 2 young women completed a variety of tasks which included crafts, stuffing envelopes, cleaning bird feeders, helping residents, and helping out with bingo during their school hours and over the odd weekend. And whereas both young women are in grade 12 and have their eyes set on furthering their education in the health field upon graduation. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly recognize Caitlin Smith and Leslie Crouse for wanting to expand their skills in the health field and for their volunteering efforts at the North Queens Nursing Home. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been request for waiver of notice. Is it agreed? All those in favour of the motion, please say aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion carried. The Honourable the Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Where it is with great sadness that yesterday we learned of the untimely deaths in Afghanistan of Master Corporal Alan Stewart and Trooper Patrick James Pentland of the Royal Canadian Dragoons. Whereas this marks the 7th and 8th deaths this week of Canadian soldiers in Afghanistan, and whereas Master Corporal Alan Stewart and Trooper Patrick James Pentland demonstrated the heroism and bravery long associated with members of the military, past and present. Therefore, be resolved, all members of this House offer sincere condolences to the respective families, the members of the Royal Canadian Dragoons, and members of the military community during this difficult time. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and pass without debate.
There's been request for waiver of notice. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour of the motion, please say aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion carried. The Honourable Member for Hants East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas growing old can mean a loss of good friends and companionship, and whereas seniors groups provide support and friendship for those going through their golden years, and whereas the Rod and Gold Mines Golden Youth Group recently celebrated their 25th anniversary, therefore be resolved this House of Assembly congratulate the Rod and Gold Mines Golden Youth Group on their 25th anniversary, their dedication and support to seniors, and wish them well in their future activities. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and pass it without debate.
There's been request for waiver of notice. Is it agreed? Agreed. Would all those in favour of the motion please say aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion carried. The Honourable Member for Cape Breton Nova.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on March 6, 2007, Atlantic University Sports announced its 2006-2007 Men's Basketball All-Stars. And whereas Cape Breton Capers Paul Blake was selected as a second-team All-Star. And whereas Paul scored 14 points and 5.8 rebounds per game, attributes that to solidify his All-Star status. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulate Paul Blake on his outstanding athletic achievement on being named 2006-2007 Second Team All-Star, and wish Paul all the best in his future endeavours. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Thank you. There's been request of waiver for waiver of notice. Is it agreed? Would all those in favour of the motion please say aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion carried. Are there further notice of motion? What? No, I will. Okay. You want to take over? Okay.
Honourable Member for Cape Breton Centre on a point of order.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the wear and tear in this House shows harder on some than others. And what I want to point out today is that people like myself and probably the member from Cape Breton South haven't weathered as well as some others. And some people have turned 39 today, and we wish to, on behalf of our caucus, wish the Speaker a happy 39th birthday.
Oh, thank you. Order, please. That's not a point of order, but the Honourable Member for Cape Breton Centre just made my mother very happy. The Honourable Member for Cape Breton South.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. On the same non-point of order, I'd like to rise on behalf of our caucus and also extend our best wishes to you on your 39th. But you know, Mr. Speaker, everybody says they're 39. Once they hit 39, they never get any older. You know, they're always holding at 39. And I can tell you the last couple of years have certainly, maybe not in terms of your years on this earth, but in terms of wearing the years that you have, has certainly grown considerably. So I wish you well in your continued efforts to keep this place operating. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I rise with some trepidation as well on this non-point of order in fear that my PDA might be in trouble as well. But I want to indicate our good wishes as well on your 39th birthday to both you and to your mother, who I expect has been with you for many years, and also to point out to Mr. Speaker that the test is not your age, but do you look it? Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, we'll continue. Hey, do you remember what you're supposed to do next? I do believe the orders of the day, oral questions put by members. Question period begin at 10:56 and end at 11:56. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question this morning will be for the Minister of Health. I'm going to table a letter from Peter McKeegan, whose wife, Helen, has Alzheimer's disease. Mr. McKeegan is in his 80s and needs help caring for his 79-year-old wife. Provincial home care hours are inadequate, so Mr. McKeegan and his wife rely partly on private home care. The bill I've just tabled, Mr. Speaker, is for 1 month of private care for December 1st to the 31st of 2006. It is for over $4,300. So my question to the Minister of Health is, why should elderly Nova Scotians have to pay so much to get the care they need?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, all seniors, as they need services, are assessed accordingly and receive the services that they're assessed to have.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on your first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, not much luck there, so I'm going to try the Minister of Finance. In the bill I just tabled, he will see that the cost of home care was actually $3,810 for December. The remaining $533.40 was for HST. Private home care services, which many seniors have no choice but to utilize, are subject to the harmonized sales tax. Services that should be provided by the provincial system in the first place are taxed. So my question to the Minister of Finance is this: why should Nova Scotians pay tax on essential health care services?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. First of all, I won't try to debate a bill that's before the House, because I'm sure the honourable members... Oh, Bill's bill, is it? Yes, well...
Invoice.
That's right. Oh, that kind of bill, yes. It's not the other kind of bill, Mr. Speaker. I'm so used to another term being used. But, you know, this issue has come up, and I respect what the honourable member is trying to do, which is to try to highlight the burden of taxation on certain people. The difficulty we have is that we have a broadly based sales tax in the province, and we have a broadly based sales tax for a reason, because it replaced a very much higher provincial sales tax, which was narrowly based. And Mr. Speaker, obviously there's no money in this year's budget to accommodate these requests, but clearly in the budgetary process for next year, we will review all of these issues and determine, you know, priorities for Nova Scotians based on what is the best interest of Nova Scotians. We have to be able to fund our programs in this province, Mr. Speaker. We have many problems, and of course the largest one is healthcare in this province. It's the most costly program we have, and therefore, Mr. Speaker, we will balance our taxation reduction issues like this bill against the needs of Nova Scotians. Thank you.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on your final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I thank the Minister of Finance for his answer, because it in fact leads very neatly into my next question, which is for the Premier, and I'm sure that there will be a broad review of tax measures just before the next election. So, Mr. Speaker, home care, funerals, children's medication, wheelchairs, these are just a few of the things in this province that are subject to the HST. So my question for the Premier is this: the HST is a decade old. Why won't the government initiate a review to determine whether or not some of these necessities of life should be taxed or not?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Finance has given indication that he will take a look at some of the issues put before the House of Assembly, and that we will have a review of some of those items before next year's budget. Hopefully we'll have that opportunity. I'll know that tomorrow. The Leader of the Opposition can help in that matter, Mr. Speaker. That's the first step. So let's get through tomorrow, Mr. Speaker, and I'm sure we'll be able to review those items next year.
Honourable member for Kings West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Education. Mr. Speaker, the Minister released a report of the Department of Students' assessment results. Mr. Speaker, this is the 6th annual Minister's Report to Parents containing results from provincial testing during the 2006 school year in 7 grade 12 courses. Mr. Speaker, despite some improvements, the results for mathematics and advanced math are worrisome. Only 28% of students writing the mathematics grade 12 provincial exam passed, a significant drop from the 2005 assessment, which was low at 31.2%. My question to the Minister, can the Minister tell Nova Scotia parents why their children's provincial exam scores have decreased this year?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And to the member opposite, I want to thank the member for sitting in on the press release this morning and for asking questions with specific reference to the results of that of the report. And it's true that the scores in math are not where we want them to be. As a result of that, we have invested heavily, both last year and this year, in our resources and our initiatives at the both the elementary and up at the high school level to try to address the issue of math scores. What we're practicing in literacy and in reading has certainly paid off, and those scores have gone up to a level where we're very proud, and we're anxious to apply the same resources and some of the same strategies to math.
The Honourable Member for Kings West on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the education of our children is vital to the future success of Nova Scotia, particularly as we have moved toward a knowledge-based economy. Mr. Speaker, the results for students taking advanced math did not fare any better. The provincial average fell to 51.3% compared to last year's 54%, while the passing rate decreased to 51.8%, a drop from 57% in 2005. Mr. Speaker, these are disturbing figures that this minister and government have to address immediately. My question to the minister, what will the minister and her department do differently to address the low provincial examination scores in mathematics?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, to the member opposite, he does reference the advanced math, and what we were finding, the advanced math course is designed for approximately 20% of our best and our brightest in high school. We're finding that about 40% of our students have enrolled in that, and so what we're attempting to do with our guidance counselors is try to assist students in selecting a course that is most appropriate to them and to their ability. We're never wanting to close the door for any student to register in any course, but we are trying to work with our students to help lead them appropriately into the program that's best designed for their needs.
The Honourable Member for Kings West on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, this minister and her department have a duty to school administrators, parents, and their children to provide necessary resources for children to succeed in the education system. Mr. Speaker, the range of marks for students taking the advanced grade 12 math range from 97.5% to a dismal 5.5%. We know from the minister's report that the average was 51.3%, which means the majority of students did not fare well. It is time that this government minister provide our Nova Scotia students the necessary resources to successfully complete high school math. My question to the minister, what resources is the minister and her department providing to students having difficulties in grade 12 math?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, to the member opposite, I'm pleased to be able to announce that in last year's budget, we had $1.5 million dedicated to math resources supports for our students. In the proposed budget this year, we have $1.6 million dedicated to that, and with the approval of the budget, we will continue to provide those supports. In addition to that, $1.2 million for math textbooks. We are making every effort to try to address the problem. We recognize it. We want to correct it.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Justice. I understand that the department is studying the possibility of two new correctional facilities to replace the aging Antigonish and Cumberland correctional facilities, in addition to last year's new project for the electronic supervision of a small group of offenders. While this may appear to be helpful in preparing for future needs, I understand from correctional staff and their representatives that the correctional facilities across the province are facing an incredible overcrowding situation. For example, Mr. Speaker, the Central Nova Scotia Correctional Facility in Burnside alone has admitted more than 1,000 offenders since January 1st. This is a one-year increase in admissions of 33%. So my question to the minister is this: what is being done in the interim to deal with the serious overcrowding in our correctional facilities?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition for the question. He's right, we have seen an increase in the incarceration in this province in regards to our provincial facilities. Correctional staff, the director, are in constant contact with superintendents to ensure that we're able to adequately house those who are incarcerated in provincial institutions in Nova Scotia. I know that there are lots of times where we have to transfer amongst the institutions that we presently have. But, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to take the opportunity as well to say that in our discussions with the federal government and in discussions with the correctional staff here in the province, we are looking in the long term because, Mr. Speaker, as you know, the federal government has embarked upon some pretty strong law and order agenda, which, Mr. Speaker, I support, and how this province does, this government does, which will mean down the road that we're going to need additional space as well. So this province is dealing with the issue in the short term, but, Mr. Speaker, as well, we are looking in the long term to solve this very important issue.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on your first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, let me provide some further evidence of how bad this overcrowding situation is. Just last weekend at the Burnside facility, there were as many as 44 offenders serving intermittent sentences due to overcrowding. They are expected to regularly report on their whereabouts. Of this group, 12 were on temporary absences without supervision. Burnside is recognized by senior officials in the Correctional Services Division as the catchment facility for all of the province. It is where all the high-risk offenders serve their sentences. Mr. Speaker, so my question for the minister is this: will the minister tell correctional staff and concerned Nova Scotians what he's doing to address the serious overcrowding that is happening this month at the Central Nova Scotia Correctional Facility?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and again to the Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition. My understanding as of just the last few days that Burnside was not full. In fact, there were several beds that were available, I think 12, the last time I checked. Mr. Speaker, there are times where their intermittent sentences are imposed, that offenders are required to do their time on weekends or whatever, but the Honourable Member would realize as well that we've included in this year's budget a substantial increase for electronic supervision. Mr. Speaker, in fact, I believe the only GPS system in North America that will be that's been introduced by this province and this government in the past year. So there's a lot of initiatives underway, Mr. Speaker, in regards to dealing with the issue that the member brings before this House.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on your final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, in addition to the overcrowding, what makes matters worse is the serious understaffing that is also taking place. For example, I understand that in both the North and West units at Burnside, there are as few as 3 staff on the floor to deal with as many as 112 inmates during the day, and only 2 staff at night to deal with as many as 132 inmates. This situation would literally be impossible to handle if there was a disturbance or some other serious issue on the floor. So I have to assume that the minister will not tolerate this kind of an unsafe situation. So my question to him is this: since this serious understaffing can't possibly be considered a safe working environment, what immediate steps is the minister taking to bring staffing up to safe levels?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you again to the Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition. I can assure the member in this House, Mr. Speaker, that there is adequate staff in place at the correctional facilities, not only in Burnside, but right across this province. And those issues of occupational health and safety issues, obviously, Mr. Speaker, there's an opportunity for staff to bring those forward to administration. But I can guarantee you, Mr. Speaker, that those issues are and will be addressed by correctional staff in Nova Scotia.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
My question is for the Minister of Tourism, Culture and Heritage. Despite knowing that legislation does not make RV camping in parking lots illegal, the province undertook an enforcement campaign in 2005 that has caused confusion and anger among RV owners. I'll table an exchange obtained through freedom of information between department staff and an irate RV owner who states, "In Nova Scotia, it is illegal to stay anywhere but a campground. For many of us, it is just too intimidating and unfriendly to visit the province." My question to the Minister, given the dozens of letters he has received saying the same thing, will he now admit our reputation among the RV community is in trouble?
The Honourable Minister of Tourism, Culture and Heritage.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you very much to the member opposite for a very important question. And it is one, without question, within the RV sector throughout the province, and obviously from some visitors, has caused some confusion. We have very clearly communicated, Mr. Speaker, to all RV associations, to the press, to anybody that has written me, that there are no laws being broken by individuals who seek permission to park in private property. And this is what this whole issue is over, Mr. Speaker, where there is some belief by member opposite and some others that some law is being broken in accordance with the Tourism Accommodation Act, which, by the way, Mr. Speaker, 3 days into my mandate as a new minister, I undertook a review which is currently going on as well. And Mr. Speaker, there are no laws being broken in this province at this time by any RVer who seeks permission or parks on private property. As a government, Mr. Speaker, we have no right to refuse that. Thank you.
The honourable member for Dartmouth East on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What is perhaps even worse is the department's response. They do nothing to correct the misconception and go on to say, I quote, "Please accept our invitation to explore Nova Scotia and see for yourself. There is no need to hurry. Relax and stay with us. Make memories for a lifetime." Another response from the department states, quote, "We would be pleased to have you and your friends visit us and experience Nova Scotia hospitality." My question to the minister, when will the department pull its head out of the sand and admit there is a serious communications problem here?
Honourable Minister of Tourism, Culture and Heritage.
Mr. Speaker, with all due respect, I guess the member opposite wasn't listening to my previous response. There are no laws being broken. We are communicating with owners and industry alike in this regard. And Mr. Speaker, again, we have undertaken a full review of the Tourism Accommodation Act, which is currently in its final review stages, and we will have more information on that. But at this time, we have made the correspondence to all involved. There are no laws being broken. And, Mr. Speaker, other than that, I mean, I don't know what else the government can say. Thank you.
The honourable member for Dartmouth East on your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I will say my hearing is quite good and I can hear everything you're saying. Mr. Speaker, we are weeks away from the tourism season. RV numbers are in serious decline, and for the third year, websites, RV magazines and chat boards label Nova Scotia as the RV-unfriendly province. While the legislation is reviewed, this department is doing nothing to address the misconceptions about parking rules. My question, Minister, how many more seasons will come and go before his department works out a solution for this issue?
The Honourable Minister of Tourism, Culture and Heritage.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And again, I do appreciate the question. I'm glad this issue has come to the floor. Mr. Speaker, we are looking forward to our new tourism strategy launch very shortly. And just for the information of the House, Mr. Speaker, air traffic is up 37% this year. Number of total visits is up 7%. Number of room nights sold is up 5%, Mr. Speaker. This government is working toward a successful tourism season, and we are going to accomplish that with the new tourism strategy. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Glace Bay.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Health. Yesterday, Mr. Speaker, it was reported that the Cape Breton District Health Authority paid about $1 million in overtime costs to cover patients' critical care needs last year. A posting was placed in the emergency department of the Cape Breton Regional Hospital that shows that within 54 days, the hospital spent over $95,000 to cover 1,500 hours of overtime at over $1,700 per day. According to the district's chief executive officer, that's running about double the normal budgeted amount. My question to the minister, Mr. Speaker, is what other DHAs are paying overtime, and was that overtime pre-approved by his department?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, as always, the DHAs are responsible for their individual budgets. And Mr. Speaker, I know that they work within it to make sure that they can provide quality care for all Nova Scotians. If that requires paying overtime, then they do so.
The Honourable Member for Glace Bay on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, this is not the first year, nor will it be the last, when overtime will have to be paid to fill in vacancies and take care of heavy workloads. In fact, Mr. Speaker, the district CEO indicated yesterday that he expects a similar expense for this year as well. Mr. Speaker, with the province spending almost half of its entire budget on health care this year, that percentage keeps going up. That kind of spending is just not sustainable. So my question to the minister, Mr. Speaker, is will he commit to hiring enough staff to fill the needs and avoid the extra expense of overtime?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, the issue is not necessarily one of hiring staff, but we continue to work through the nursing strategy and other employment strategies in order to have full complements of staffing in each hospital. But Mr. Speaker, we're also talking about extra usage when it comes to our alternate level of care patients, looking for placements for them in long-term care facilities and those types of things that requires extra staffing. Mr. Speaker, I can say even though they had some overages in last year in terms of overtime, that the district health authorities in 0506 came back at 1/20th of 1% of their budgets, which is phenomenal work of mitigating their budgets.
The Honourable Member for Glace Bay on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, I would think that it's pretty obvious to anyone who read that article that the Cape Breton District Health Authority, like most other DHAs across this province, are in dire need of additional permanent staff. Mr. Speaker, filling vacancies as they arise creates extra work for the administrators and uncertainty in the public who don't know from week to week which emergency departments are open and which are not. So my final question to the minister is, where is your health human resources plan, Mr. Minister?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, again, it is not necessarily that of vacancies, but actual use that's going on in our hospitals. Some of our hospitals are running now at about 104%. And if they need to run at 104%, they need to have extra staffing to provide the quality and expert care that they provide every day.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Health. You know, in law amendments, we've heard all week about this government doing little consultation, no consultation, or consultation, they just don't listen to people. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to ask the Minister of Health about the RFP process that's begun on building new nursing homes and residential care facilities and community-based option homes. We've been hearing from these operators who either have RCFs or community-based options, and they're saying that these residents want to submit a proposal, but they feel the process has been set up in favour of the larger groups, such as the McLeod Group, Mr. Speaker. So I want to ask the minister, why is his department continuing to work against residential care facilities and CBOs and not allowing them to participate fully in this process?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, as we construct 832 beds across this province, as we replace 721 beds across the province, we needed to have a transparent process. That transparent process is one that is held within the RFP process. All Nova Scotians, all companies in Nova Scotia, all private companies in Nova Scotia, all private associations in Nova Scotia can apply for this RFP process.
The honourable member for Cape Breton Centre on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, the transparency here, Mr. Speaker, is that this does not work in favor of small options, or CBOs, I should say, Mr. Speaker. Now, one of the homes that, and I know the minister knows about this because we've talked about it, is the Dominion Guest Home in my constituency, Mr. Speaker. That is held and run, managed by a healthcare professional with some years' experience. Now, this group wants to submit a proposal as a small options home, but Dominion Guest Home doesn't seem to fit anywhere in the criteria outlined in the RFP process. The area served by this home is in desperate need of these beds. They have 6 beds now, but only 3 are sponsored by the Department of Health. So my question to the minister is, why do CBOs continue to be excluded from licensing and apparently the RFP process?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, I can say that throughout the continuing care process, as we rolled out the continuing care strategy, looking at the requirements of beds required across the province, looking at the level 1 or level 2 nursing homes was where we needed to focus our energies and focus our monies. That is where we're going to be focusing that. I know there's a number of options there for RCF level of care as well. There is very little requirement for CBO from our first stage of work, and the RFP does represent that requirement of level 2 nursing homes across the province.
Honourable member for Cape Breton Centre on your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, he should talk to the people that want access to those beds. Continuously, 3 beds sit empty in that CBO because the Department of Health refuses to fill them. You know, not every small option home has the ability to expand to have the number of licensed beds of a long-term care facility, Mr. Speaker. And they want fair consideration. That's all they want, Mr. Speaker, is fair consideration. So my question to the minister, what assurances can he offer small operators that the process is not going to favor larger nursing homes at the expense of CBOs?
Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I can assure the member opposite that the RFP process is one that is transparent, one that has set guidelines, one that will be followed through, and one that will benefit all seniors requiring long-term care facilities in Nova Scotia.
The honourable member for Dartmouth South, Portland Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Health. We know that the problems with the physical plant at Simpson Hall at the former Nova Scotia Hospital site have been growing worse over the past few years. It may come as no surprise, then, that Capital Health, in a memo dated April 2nd, 2007, announced to those who run the mental health and addiction treatment programs that the facility will be closed by the summer. I will table that memo. We are given to understand that the facility is not being replaced, however. I'd like to quote for the minister from that memo. We recognize the turmoil for staff and client services during the move period and apologize for any inconvenience this may cause. I ask the minister, what arrangements are being made to assist and limit any negative impact on the up to 200 staff and clients who use Simpson Hall every day?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the issue of Simpson Hall is one that we deal with on quite a regular basis, looking at alternatives and trying to find ways to provide that outpatient service that it does so well. Mr. Speaker, as the members opposite have brought to this floor of this House before, is the state of that building and the requirement for a new one or alternate locations. And Mr. Speaker, would be working with Capital Health through their redevelopment phase, through their facilities phase, to see what the options are. But Mr. Speaker, we will work with all those people involved to make sure that services are not interrupted and that if a move is warranted, that there will be the least disruptions possible.
The honourable member for Dartmouth South, Portland Valley on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Some of these programs require sustainability. This is going to be another temporary move for the addiction prevention and treatment services staff and clients. And to quote the memo again, quote, "It is difficult to determine the length of time before a permanent home will be secured." So let me list some of the additional affected programs and services within this facility: community mental health, detox, core addiction services such as methadone program, the Schizophrenia Society, Dartmouth Literacy Network, and the Dartmouth Community Health Board. Most of these are outpatient services on which their clients have come to rely. It is easily accessible via public transit, an important factor for the many clients without private transportation. My next question is, when will these services be relocated to areas that are just as easily accessible by those clients reliant on public transit?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And as I said in my previous answer, is that as the process does finalize, as we know exactly what we're going to be doing, we'll be communicating that with the community, we'll be communicating that with the member opposite, and we will be ensuring that the services will be available to those individuals that require those services today and in the future.
The honourable member for Dartmouth South, Portland Valley, on your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There's a lot of apprehension and unrest among the clients and staff of these programs. My final question will be for the Minister of Transportation and Public Works. The facility at Simpson Hall currently houses many programs that need to coordinate their work within the same facility in the best interests of their clients. So I ask the Minister, what options has his department presented to Capital Health to ensure that another suitable site can be found for these important outpatient services?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Public Works.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, but I'm going to refer that question to the Minister of Health, and he has more intimate knowledge of the subject.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as I said, the Capital District Health Authority is the one that is developing their resource plan of the requirements of their facilities, and then coming back to us with their request of where they would like to either relocate or renovate or what have you of Simpson Hall. Mr. Speaker, it wasn't so long ago that the member of Queens had presented to the floor of this House on the deplorable condition of Simpson Hall, and we're trying to address that, and Mr. Speaker will ensure that the services are available to those people who so much need it.
The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party.
Mr. Speaker, over the past 12 months, the Strait area has gone from a high level of excitement over the proposed Anadarko liquefied natural gas facility to witnessing the complete deterioration of this LNG project, and now comes news of the loss of 20 jobs at the federal gypsum plant in Point Upper, Richmond County. Speaker, the jobs at Federal Gypsum are good-paying jobs and provided a significant economic impact to the Strait area. This government has poured millions into Federal Gypsum to help move the company along, but apparently has now given up on this facility. Mr. Speaker, we now have 20 workers in the Strait area looking for help and direction from this government. So my question to the Premier is, what is your plan now for the Federal Gypsum Company and for the 20 workers whom you've allowed to slip into unemployment?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I refer that to the Minister of Economic Development to provide an update with respect to this file.
The Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I can assure the member opposite and all members that this government has been involved with the Federal Gypsum from day one. We've invested the taxpayers' money into the project there, Mr. Speaker. We had concerns with Federal Gypsum, and we relayed that off to the management of Federal Gypsum, Mr. Speaker, but my staff at OED and NSBI has been working weekly with Federal Gypsum to look at other provincial investors into the company.
The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party, on your first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, ironically, in the concerns raised by the Minister, at no point did he raise a concern for the 20 workers and the 20 families that are now unemployed because of this government's inability to be able to work with the company to make it a success. Mr. Speaker, residents of the Strait area gave their full support for the new liquefied natural gas facility in Point Upper, yet it now appears that Anadarko has all but given up on this project. More worrisome, Mr. Speaker, is the fact that it appears that the Premier and his government have all but given up on this project as well. Mr. Speaker, this was a project that terrific opportunities for economic creation in our province, and at the same time could have provided an alternate source of energy for our province as well. So my question again to the Premier is, can he advise what he is doing to establish a liquefied natural gas industry in our province?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr.
Speaker, I'll refer that again to the Minister of Economic Development so that he can provide an update.
The Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We are still working with the company that owns the property up there. Nova Scotia Business Inc. is the lead agency working on to that file. We're working in conjunction with my Minister of Energy onto the file, and we're in hopes to find a company that will take the project on, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, LNG could have provided a great opportunity here in this province for all sorts of alternative forms of energy. Mr. Speaker, could have even helped with ironing some of the minister's shirts here in the Province House as well. But, Mr. Speaker, we are aware that a company has approached this government in regards to building a new refinery in the Strait area. Yet once again, this government has all been but silent on this project. Speaker, such a project of this magnitude could mean hundreds of jobs for the Strait area and a great economic benefit for our province. Mr. Speaker, this government should be doing all it can to work with this company, but it appears that there is little interest by the government as a parcel of land apparently has yet to be identified by this government for the proponent of this project. Therefore, my final supplementary, and hopefully he'll answer this one, Mr. Speaker, is why will the Premier not show leadership in the establishment of long-term, good-paying jobs in rural Nova Scotia, more importantly, in his own backyard in the Strait area?
The Honourable the Premier.
Again, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the interim leader, of the Liberal Party for the question, and I'll refer that to the Minister of Economic Development.
The Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Maybe my shirt hasn't been ironed, but I do not have enough grease in my hair to grease a whole fleet of trucks. But Mr. Speaker, in saying this government, since 1999, we have created over 20,000 jobs in this province, Mr. Speaker. I read a resolution this morning, Mr. Speaker, here in the House on the credit union program that we have, Mr. Speaker, that I believe that you had an input into development in this province. And it's created and maintained over 1,500 jobs. Mr. Speaker, we're working with the RDAs and the communities to develop economic growth in that community and all communities. And Mr. Speaker, we'll keep on doing so.
The Honourable Member for Queens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Health Promotion and Protection. The 19 supervised beaches in Nova Scotia are kept safe by the Nova Scotia Lifeguard Service, last year serving from the July 1st weekend until August 27th. Except Aylesford Lake and Lawrencetown beaches, which were supervised until September the 5th. In the supervised areas, the Lifeguard Service has enjoyed a 33-year no drowning record, and this is a testament to the good work done by these vigilant guardians. The one problem I have had raised with me is that the season does not take into account the Labor Day long weekend when many people are trying to get in that last day at the beach. My question, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister is what will be the duration of supervision on Nova Scotian beaches this summer?
The Honourable Minister of Health Promotion and Protection.
Mr. Speaker, to the member opposite, we intend to provide the same service this year as we provided last year. The member does raise a legitimate concern. However, I'm led to believe, or I understand, that we have an issue specifically being able to retain the employees during that Labor Day long weekend. Many of the lifeguards are university students who are returning to classes during that Labor Day long weekend, and we would be unable to provide the services with the existing employees that we have.
The Honourable Member for Queens on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, last summer there was a tragic loss of life at Melmerby Beach in Pictou County on the Labor Day long weekend. A mother, seeing her young daughter struggling in the water, attempted to assist her and was herself swept away by a strong undertow. The beach was unsupervised at the time, and even with the quick work of first responders, the mother drowned, while her daughter was saved by another beachgoer. My question is, why doesn't Nova Scotia have supervision on the Labor Day long weekends so families can safely enjoy the last weekend of summer?
The Honourable Minister of Health Promotion and Protection.
Mr. Speaker, as I said in my first response, it's difficult for the lifeguard system to be able to retain employees for that long weekend. Many of the people that we employ for that service are university students, and often they're heading back to university for that long weekend. We do, however, clearly mark the beaches that are supervised, that they're swim at your own risk opportunity there, and certainly it's a tragic event, and we would encourage people to follow the directions of the signs and to swim safely when there aren't supervisors in place, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Queens on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, through you to the Minister, I would encourage he and his department to at least try and look at the necessity at having full supervised beaches throughout our long weekends. It's just too important to at least not try and find ways to fund and increase the number of lifeguards. 2 beaches last year were supervised through to September the 5th. What was done on these 2 beaches should be expanded to all supervised beaches. We have heard of the potential difficulties in supervising these beaches. However, I want to ask again, what steps has this minister taken to explore the other possibilities of expanding the supervised season?
The Honourable Minister of Health Promotion and Protection.
Mr. Speaker, what I'll say to the member opposite is that our lifeguards do a great job for the province of Nova Scotia. Many of them are university students that have gone through the lifeguard training process that we have here in the province of Nova Scotia. It's a service that we're proud to offer, but unfortunately, because of the nature of the employees, they're often university students, and they have to go back to university. The incident that the member opposite refers to is a tragic incident. It happened at a point in time when there were very, very high seas at that time, and I understand that there were signs in place to warn people from swimming during that particular day.
Honourable Member for Cape Breton South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question today is to the Minister of Community Services. Mr. Speaker, as of March 19, 2007, the Cape Breton Housing Authority indicates there are 109 vacant public housing units in that area waiting for refurbishment. In addition to these units, another 40 units becomes vacant on a monthly basis as existing tenants move out of public housing. And Mr. Speaker, there are an additional 89 units within the Cape Breton Housing Authority for which there are no applications on file. My question to the Minister, Mr. Speaker, why are so many housing units vacant, and what are you doing to fill them?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. To my honourable colleague across the way, I thank him for the opportunity to rise and discuss this issue, Mr. Speaker. And I know my honourable colleague speaks of an issue that is of great concern to this member and indeed to all of the members from Cape Breton, as it has been raised by the other party, Mr. Speaker, and as well as to all members of the government and indeed the department. Mr. Speaker, there are challenges all across this province when it comes to our public housing. Mr. Speaker, we've invested millions of dollars in refurbishing. We've invested countless hours and commitment. And Mr. Speaker, we do our very best to ensure that we have safe, healthy public housing available for our tenants across the province. Indeed, just this winter, Mr. Speaker, we invested in a winter works program specifically in the Cape Breton region to ensure that families and low-income individuals, Mr. Speaker, would have adequate housing.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton South on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'll present some more disturbing facts to the House and to the Minister here today. As of February 28th, this year, there were 382 eligible seniors and 279 eligible families waiting for public housing, some for many months. In addition, there are 145 individuals under the age of 58 who filed applications for seniors housing. While these people are not usually eligible for public housing, they will be approved if there are vacancies not filled by seniors. And Mr. Speaker, new public housing projects have been approved for Cape Breton, but not one unit was actually built in the last fiscal year. New construction, Mr. Speaker, is not keeping up with the demand, and for some reason, existing units remain vacant. My question to the Minister, Mr. Speaker, if so many units are vacant, why is the wait list so long?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And again, to my honourable colleague, I know that he speaks of an issue that he has a vast understanding of, Mr. Speaker, and indeed his numbers are correct, Mr. Speaker. We do have some challenges, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to some of our public housing. Mr. Speaker, in some instances, the applicants simply do not qualify for the public housing. In some instances, the housing is not where the housing unit themselves are not where the applicants want to be, Mr. Speaker. And of course, if we do have applicants that don't qualify, certainly they can be considered for housing when there are vacancies that cannot be filled with age-restricted clients, as the individual mentioned earlier, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Cape Breton South on your final supplementary.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, one of the problems that we face in the Cape Breton Regional Housing Authority, and I'm sure in other housing authorities, is that now the criteria is first looked at instead of in the needs assessment being put into place to help people who are desperately in need of housing. It seems to me that the needs of low-income Cape Bretoners, Mr. Speaker, are not being met. There is no reason why the Housing Authority should have so many vacancies, almost 200, when there are almost 800 applications for public housing. The department has to look very hard at its current practices of new construction and refurbishing of public housing units to ensure those people who need the homes actually receive them. So my final question to the Minister, Mr. Speaker, are needs assessment done before housing units are approved for construction?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and indeed to my honourable colleague, it's balancing those needs that indeed is very important. It's the needs of the clientele, Mr. Speaker, the needs of the community and the region, along with the fiscal availability. And Mr. Speaker, in this fiscal, we face some challenges with our new housing developments. We had the dollars there, we committed the dollars. This government is fully committed to those housing units. Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, the construction industry and the developers could not fulfill a lot of those commitments on time, Mr. Speaker. So the dollars are there, the projects are committed, and I look forward to the second round to ensure that we have even more housing options available, Mr. Speaker, for all Nova Scotians.
The honourable member for Halifax Citadel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Community Services. Your department recently unveiled its 10-year plan for childcare in Nova Scotia. Part of this plan is to introduce 1,000 new spaces over a 10-year period. 1,000 spaces created over a 10-year period are not enough, considering that the average wait list at childcare centres in the Halifax Regional Municipality alone is 109 families long. These families need spaces now, not at some point over the next 10 years. My question, what is your department going to do to help the families who need childcare right now?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Do you know the child care plan that this government has prepared, that this government has rolled out for Nova Scotians is one that is sustainable, Mr. Speaker. It's a healthy plan. It will ensure that the future of tomorrow, the youth of today, the children of today are well cared for in those very early years, Mr. Speaker. Our plan, $138 million, that was reaffirmed through the federal government's commitment in the recently passed federal budget, is one, Mr. Speaker, that will go on for many years to come. We're very proud of it as we roll out individual components of the plan. It will include over 1,000 spaces, Mr. Speaker, 550 portable spaces, Mr. Speaker. Recently, we just announced over $600,000 in repair and renovation funding, Mr. Speaker, and the list goes on, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Halifax Atlantic on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the child care strategy is one page long, and some of these children will be teenagers by the time this policy rolls out. Mr. Speaker, today some centres, like the University Children's Centre in my constituency, have as many as 150 children waiting for a space. According to the Action Coalition on Early Childhood Education, the average wait list is 100 children alone. There's clearly a need for more spaces right now. Many parents have to delay returning to work or school because they cannot find childcare. My question, what do you say to the parents who cannot earn a livelihood because they cannot find a licensed space for their children?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and indeed to my honourable colleague across the way. The child care plan is indeed an entire website, Mr. Speaker, and I tabled in this House a full document that I provided to my honourable colleague across the way. It's on the record, and I encourage my honourable colleague to investigate that, Mr. Speaker, as he will find many components to this $138 million plan, Mr. Speaker, that include, just to mention a couple, Mr. Speaker, $54 million committed by this government for operational funding, Mr. Speaker, for commercial centres, for non-profit centres, Mr. Speaker, to ensure benefits and salary for the hard-working child care providers of this province, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Halifax Citadel on your final
Well,
supplementary.
evidently there might not have been enough adequate childcare when some members on the other side were being raised, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, parents in my constituency and parents in Nova Scotia need more than the minister to act as a web nanny. Mr. Speaker, I've received numerous phone calls from parents who cannot access spaces for their children. Parents who are forced to extend their leave from work past 12 months. However, they risk losing their jobs. My question, what are parents supposed to do when they cannot find a space but have used up all of their parental leave?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Mr. Speaker, indeed, the $138 million 10-year plan by this government is a sustainable plan, Mr. Speaker. It has been applauded across the country, Mr. Speaker. Our commitment to the future of tomorrow, Mr. Speaker, will pay off in droves, Mr. Speaker. As a parent, as an educator, I believe firmly, Mr. Speaker, in educating and beginning with the young, Mr. Speaker. The new component, the family home child care, will be rolled out in any day, Mr. Speaker. That will ensure that we have even more choice in child care across this province, Mr. Speaker. And indeed, in early May, I've instructed staff to expedite the process to ensure that we have more spaces available on the ground as soon as possible, Mr. Speaker, for all families across this province.
The honourable member for Pictou West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question through you is to the Minister of Economic Development. Earlier in this session, when we asked the Minister about the status of the CAP program, this is what he said. I take the federal minister's word the same as I would anybody's word on the floor of this House. He made a commitment to me and this government. The government is committed to the CAP program in this province, and I assure members of this House that the CAP program sites on Sunday, April the 1st, will be operating the same as they are on March 31st. Well, Mr. Speaker, March 31st has come and gone, which is the deadline for continuing the CAP program. And Nova Scotians deserve to know what is the status of CAP. So I want to ask the Minister, is this government still supporting CAP, and if so, what level of funding will it receive in 2007-2008?
The Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I said earlier in the session, that this government supports a CAP program in this province. I took the minister, the federal minister, by his word, and the minister has lived to his word, Mr. Speaker. It was in the budget, the federal budget, Mr. Speaker, that was tabled by the federal government.
The honourable member for Pictou West on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, volunteers have been lobbying for months, as we know, to continue this program. It is certainly invaluable for tourists, for seniors, for small businesses, and for community organizations. A 2004 evaluation of the CAP program undertaken by ECO's Research states that CAP sites serve a vital public good by providing internet access and IC training to thousands of Canadians. Yet the study points out that barely 25% of low-income households have internet access at home. So, Mr. Speaker, if we have no assurance of funding here for CAP in this province, how are Nova Scotians ever going to bridge the digital divide?
The Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I can assure the member and all Nova Scotians that this government supports a CAP program in this province, and the CAP programs will maintain for the current year, Mr. Speaker. And we have now a commitment from the federal government, and we have proof from the Deputy Minister of Industry that the funding is in their budget for this upcoming year, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Pictou West on your final supplementary.
Well, I asked in my first question, Mr. Speaker, what level of funding we're going to get from this department, and so far I haven't heard an answer. But, Mr. Speaker, only 62% of Nova Scotians outside of Metro have access to the internet. This government has promised high-speed internet to all areas of this province, but not for another 2.5 years. So far, all I've seen is pilot projects. So my final question to the minister: when is this government going to get serious about providing high-speed internet access to every Nova Scotian?
The Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Mr. Speaker, a good indication of how serious this government is, and it would be a good indication from that party to support our budget, Mr. Speaker, where there's $10 million in that budget for broadband in this province, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, our Premier made a commitment to Nova Scotians that we'd have broadband across this province 100% by the end of 2009. I don't know where those people were when we were discussing that, but now they want us to really rush it. Well, Mr. Speaker, we are rushing it, and we need support from that party for our budget to make sure that we live to our commitment and to secure broadband for all Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Kings West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Natural Resources. Mr. Speaker, forests in Nova Scotia are habitats for thousands of species of plants and animals. By continuing to manage our forests without proper consultation and a long-term plan, we will disrupt nature, force plants and animals into reduced numbers, and further contribute to the destruction of our environment. We need a forest strategy plan, and we need it now. What future condition will we leave our province in for our children and children's children? Other Atlantic provinces, such as Newfoundland and Prince Edward Island, have taken the initiative and are implementing a long-term forest management plan. My question to the minister: will your government commission a voluntary task force to develop a long-term forest strategy?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, the member opposite brings up a very important matter for not only this government, but indeed for the future of all Nova Scotia and Nova Scotians. Our forests are a huge employer, a giant economic generator in the province, but it also provide many other attributes to Nova Scotians, such as recreational and use. So there's a lot of reasons why we want to make sure there's a balance with our forestry strategy, and we are looking forward to very shortly announcing the process by which we're going to conduct this review, but I can assure the member opposite that there will be lots of public consultation and we will get it right.
The honourable member for Kings West on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the minister for that level of commitment so far. Mr. Speaker, my office has received a high amount of emails, phone calls and letters calling for government to take action on this matter. We're waiting, Mr. Speaker. It is beyond me how the government can continue to push this issue to the side. In a presentation from a senior member of the Minister's Department, consultations were to be made with stakeholders and a broad public outreach. Mr. Speaker, my question to the Minister: what stakeholders and members of the public did you consult on this issue to date?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I think that we should be clear that what we are talking about is trying to get a process for consultation in place. And Mr. Speaker, there has been a lot of consultation, in fact, not only within Nova Scotia, but across the country and internationally, as to best practices as to how to get this done in a way that it gets the right information, encourages the correct public consultation, and that ultimately that the results will be accepted by all Nova Scotians as being appropriate and the best for the future of Nova Scotia's forests.
The honourable member for Kings West on your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We cannot afford to waste any more time on this matter. We have relied on the sustainability of our forests for generations to house us, to keep us warm, to employ our citizens, and even to build our ships. Now the table has turned, and it's our forests who need our help. My question to the minister: when? When can we expect your government to finally take action, create a voluntary task force designed to plan a strategy on forest sustainability in Nova Scotia?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Mr. Speaker, in answer to the member's question, again, the first step is to establish the process. That is in the works. I would anticipate that within the next number of weeks there should be a public announcement. There has been a lot of consultation with both stakeholder groups, and I want to make sure that it's done right. I believe that it has been done right, but ultimately Cabinet will make that decision, and at the time that we're ready to make the announcement, we will certainly be back to them, and we look forward to their support for the strategy.
The honourable member for Halifax-Chebucto. Thank you. This will be for the Minister of Economic Development. Mr. Speaker, in November, I asked the Minister why the government has not yet introduced procurement policies that ban the purchase by the government of sweatshop-produced goods. The Minister responded by saying that his government understands the importance of the issue, that staff had been assigned to the file, and that the government would be coming forward with a policy. Well, Mr. Speaker, right now, the government of Manitoba has gone beyond a pre-existing policy that they adopted, and they're actually enacting legislation about no sweatshop procurement. So can I ask the Minister, when is Nova Scotia not going to bring in legislation, but when at least will there be a policy on banning sweatshop-produced purchases by the provincial government? When can we see that? The Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I relayed this on to procurement, and I've asked them to come back to me with a policy onto the issue, Mr. Speaker, and I'm waiting for that
Order,
policy.
please. Time allotted for question period has expired. The Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to rise on either a point of order or a personal privilege. I guess you can rule on that. Order. Mr. Speaker, sometimes in question period we get embroiled into the barbs going back and forth. Mr. Speaker, and I believe that maybe my tone to the leader of the Liberal Party was out of order, and I'd like to retract my statement, Mr. Speaker, I made, and I apologize for if I embarrassed any member of the legislature, Mr. Speaker.
The record shall reflect the same. The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and obviously I believe the Minister's comments certainly are appreciated in light of question period, and I hope he'll accept as well my tongue-in-cheek comment. Being our last question period wasn't meant to be too much of a slight, was more meant tongue-in-cheek than anything else, but certainly if it was offensive to any of the members on the government side, certainly I would retract my comments as well, Mr. Speaker. So with that, I certainly appreciate the Minister's comments.
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today on a point of order. During this session of the House of Assembly, members of the opposition have repeatedly brought forward personal cases to the floor of this legislature, naming individuals in the process. Cases, Mr. Speaker, that contain inaccurate information. These statements were made knowing full and well that I and my Cabinet colleagues cannot respond due to being ethically bound, and rightfully so, by confidentiality. The impression this leaves to members and to all Nova Scotians, due to the broadcast of legislative television and the availability of Hansard on the internet, is that I and other ministers are withholding information. As members of the Executive Council, we are bound by confidentiality, so I question how ethical this practice truly is. To make very serious accusations about the professional standards and competence of departmental staff, as well as a minister's ability to lead within the department without being provided the ability to defend decisions or correct inaccurate information, does not seem to be in the historic tenor of the House. Bringing into the legislature the personal reputations and lives of Nova Scotians who occasionally need to seek the assistance of their government does not fit, in my mind, with the legacy of this historic Nova Scotia legislature. Nova Scotians have an absolute right to contact their government representatives when they have questions or concerns about a process policy, or indeed individual case handling within a government department. And I encourage all to do so in an appropriate manner and setting. The protocol for these concerns is in place, Mr. Speaker, respecting the